Council. Welcome, everyone. As the City of Portland moves toward the implementation of our privacy and information protection principles, we're here this morning to listen to community stories about experiences with facial recognition technologies. Central to the development of privacy strategies is the issue of equity. Underserved communities are the most negatively impacted and at the highest risk in this digital age. Our public responsibility as a city is to develop and utilize responsible, equitable technology that serves the people. We do not currently have comprehensive privacy policies in place and procedures to ensure the use of a technology like facial recognition does not harm civil rights and civil liberties. Today's conversation is an important step, but we have considerable work ahead. We must remain open to the opportunities to collaborate with private firms in making FRT and related surveillance technologies more responsible by eliminating bias and increasing privacy protections. The desire for equitable public benefit of new technologies will allow Portland to remain a city of innovation. And to just underscore this important point, we are not opposed to technology or innovation in this city, but we are 100% in support of deployment of technologies for the benefit of the public and not to the detriment of the public. Before I turn this over to the Bureau, I'd like to turn this over to Commissioner Hardesty, who'd like to make a few comments as well.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, community members, for being here and actually, quite frankly, making sure that your voice is heard in this very critical conversation. As you know, this is part two. When we met last, we had a very robust conversation with guests who have already implemented some types of public bans, and we also heard about how this technology had been deployed specifically in China. When we concluded that initial work session, there were a couple of asks. Commissioner Nick Fish had asked the Police Bureau to provide us with a memo that actually articulated what their current surveillance activity was, and B, how they could possibly utilize facial recognition technology in the future. And we are still waiting for that memo, so I'm hopeful that when Portland Police Bureau comes up today, they will be able to provide us that written memo that my former colleague requested. So this is really about racial justice. I want to be very clear. This is about racial justice and our right to privacy. This is about whether or not we will allow companies who have a financial motive to gather our information and sell it and utilize it in a way that is detrimental to our community. This is not, as the mayor said, an anti-technology operation or proposal. This is one that respects the right of every man, woman, and child in the city of Portland to own their body and their biometrics. And it is totally within our own personal right to decide whether or not we want Google or Amazon to have our individual data. I am so excited about today. As you know, we will lay out today for you both the work that's been done since the first work session and this one, to the timeline under which we will continue to seek public engagement and advice, and 3, the timeline for when we will be convening back at Portland City Council to make a decision about which direction the city of Portland will be going. I want to thank the mayor. I want to thank my colleagues because we've had some really, really detailed conversations about this technology, and I think we are 99% of one accord. We want to respect technology, but we want to respect our people more. And so on that note, I turn it over to Hector.
Actually, Commissioner Fritz would like to make an opening statement as well. Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. I'm joining you by phone and watching on the open signal. Thanks to the folks there and the captioners for providing this to the whole public. I just wanted to take a little step back and acknowledge the work of the Smart Cities staff. Thanks to Judith Mowry and the Office of Equity and Human Rights. This is really a model for how a city should be addressing issues of both technology and privacy. We started off with the policy and setting the principles, and that was an important foundational work. And this, I think, is a great example of a practical application of those policies and of the technologies. So I appreciate Commissioner Hardesty for you and your staff's work on this particular aspect of privacy in technology, and also making sure that we're equitable in the ways that technology is implemented. And so I'm very much looking forward to today's work session. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Fritz. Now we'll hear from Hector Dominguez from the Smart City PDX program at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, which has been leading this work in partnership with the Office of Equity and Human Rights. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, Commissioners, audience, thank you so much for being here this morning. Thank you, everyone, for the introductions. I think they're right. And happy International Privacy Day today. So today is International Privacy Day. Very proper, and that was a coincidence. However, sometimes the universe tells us something about all this. Well, my name is Hector Dominguez. I am part of the Smart City PDX team. My role is the Open Data Coordinator, and we are part of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Our Smart City PDX program is really honored to contribute to this important work to build policies and infrastructure that will protect the most vulnerable, enable economic opportunities and innovation, and ultimately enhance our democracy by using and promoting responsible and ethical technology based on social equity. This work could not have been shaped this way without the collaboration with our Office of Equity and Human Rights. The right to privacy and access to fair economic opportunities are basic human rights. The impacts of over-surveillance and, in some cases, the lack of surveillance for those who have been invisible to the social safety in general may keep hardship and injustice in place. Digital rights have to be part of our conversations around equity and how we are building a city for everyone. Rights like universal and equal internet access, digital literacy, privacy and digital security, and open and ethical digital services are enablers for a fair and better society. This conversation must have an inclusive and fair participation of all the different communities in Portland. This work session is intended to bring some of those voices, particularly those directly impacted to the policy making and decision making. Our team is expecting to have more guidance on the drafting of a policy that regulates facial recognition technologies, not only in the local government, but also how it gets deployed and used in our community in general. Today, we will hear stories and analysis from our community groups representing those impacted by facial recognition. We encourage you to participate and ask those questions. And Portland Police Bureau will share challenges and opportunities on these technologies, particularly, obviously, in law enforcement by request of City Council in our previous work session. We have divided the work session into 20-minute blocks. Each block will have 10 minutes presentation, followed by 10 minutes for questions from our city commissioners. Unless you have an urgent question for clarification purposes, please, we ask you to hold your questions until the end of the 10-minute presentation. Our team will manage the time and will give 5 1-minute warning to presenters, and a request to stop after the 10-minute presentation ends to allow time for those questions. We remind all that this is an educational work session and that presenters and members of the public can contact the Smart Cities PDX team to contribute to this conversation and learn more about what are the next steps. And please, we encourage you to visit our website, www.smartcitypdx.com. Now, I would like to present Director Andrea Durbin of Bureau Planning and Sustainability for an opening statement about this work session.
Good morning. Thank you, Hector. Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners, and guests today. I'm Andrea Durbin, the Director of Bureau Planning and Sustainability. Our Bureau's Smart City PDX program was directed to implement the city's privacy and information protection principles. As a bureau that brings people and places together, we will work with our bureau partners to provide direction on the implementation of these principles. Since last September's initial work session on facial recognition, our Smart City PDX program has listened to Portland communities about their concerns around the impacts of facial recognition technologies, and we look forward to the continued conversation today. When used for surveillance, facial recognition raises significant concerns and risks around privacy, intrusiveness, gender and racial bias, and lack of transparency, all elements of our digital rights. At BPS, we are working to help solve for the creation of a more equitable, prosperous, and participatory community, which includes the protection of those individual digital rights. As we learned from Portlanders this morning about their experiences with facial recognition or surveillance, this information will help guide the development of future responsible policy that protects Portlanders first. With good government at the heart of this policy development, city bureaus are working to ensure fair and equitable outcomes and eliminate bias. As Hector mentioned, one of our key partners in this work is the Office of Equity and Human Rights. In particular, I'd like to appreciate Dr. Markeisha Smith's leadership in this area. Unfortunately, Dr. Smith was unable to join us this morning, but I would like to introduce my colleague from OEHR, Judith Mowry, who will share Dr. Smith's insights into the racial justice disparities that could be lessened through the development of sound policies.
Thank you very much, Director Durbin. And hello, good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here, excited to not have been the first person to talk about equity in a room. It's really, it's a great, I'm very encouraged. And Dr. Smith was unable to be here, and she is sorry about that. I think that you all have expressed a clear understanding that as an institution, we need to make a commitment that we put the safety and well-being of communities of color as a top priority. When we think about, we need to know that the burden of proof is met before things are launched, that anything we're doing is not going to harm communities, particularly that have been historically harmed, and that's communities of color and other marginalized communities. Data and technology has been used in horrific ways historically, and while I'm sure everyone here thinks, well, that would never happen here, we just need to be incredibly responsible about how we think about that and what kind of data we own and what kind of data we have flying around. And the other thing is just without any regulation, that means that currently it is Google and Amazon and others that are creating the regulation through a consumer market. And we think it's important to have a more thoughtful approach. There's a lot more conversations to be had, and we look forward to serving the city as we continue to find ways to be able to have the wonderful benefits of technology without the harm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Judith. So we will ask Chief Ryan Lee from our Portland Police Bureau to come and join us to the table. I have Chief Lee's presentation here. We know that it's a little bit challenging because presentation is going to be shown on the screen above. But for those who are joining remotely, they will see that through the broadcast. Chief Lee.
Good morning. I'm Assistant Chief Ryan Lee, and I want to thank the council and the city for the responsibility and intentionality in evaluating facial recognition technology. I also want to recognize the empty chair on council, Commissioner Fish, who valued process and who gave us the opportunity to gather data and assess the potential risk and benefits of facial recognition technology in policing. And reflecting on Council's September 17, 2019 facial recognition open session, Pam Dixon, an expert in facial recognition technology field, spoke to the improvement of facial recognition and also the dangerous impact when programs are not established and managed properly. Before I continue, let me be clear. The Police Bureau does not use facial recognition technology, has not been seeking to use facial recognition technology, and is not asking for facial recognition technology today in this presentation. This presentation is simply if council, in their wisdom, finds a point in time when facial recognition technology is deemed to be appropriate, outline some of the policy that we would rigorously want to put in place before proceeding with any program. Today, I will be speaking to some of the information gaps from the previous presentations, chiefly policy and oversight. The Police Bureau recognizes and shares public concerns with facial recognition technology. They're warranted. Poor algorithms can produce poor results. Poor usage can produce even greater harm to the community. That's of concern to us. The Police Bureau takes public trust seriously. In doing this, we weigh the benefits and risks associated with any technology. We recognize as technology develops at unprecedented rates that we need to be in a position where we may properly evaluate it and the underlying science of the field. Next one. In our research, we found that police agencies who have lost public trust utilizing facial recognition technology fail to follow the U.S. Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance recommendations. Specifically, they did not seek public input from the onset. They did not use quality algorithms. They failed to train and/or require certification standards. They did not establish policies, framework, or oversight, and they had no mechanism for maintenance of their programs that involved community oversight. However, we have found that facial recognition technology is a tool that, if properly managed, could be a public safety asset. Agencies such as the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and our northern neighbors, the Seattle Police Department, who are recognized by the ACLU for establishing a model program, have been responsible stewards of their programs. Because of this, they've heard little public concern. As such, there have been thousands of arrests aided by facial recognition technology. Prior to discussing any potential use of facial recognition technology by the police, it's important for me to address the concept of the confidence threshold. Facial recognition technology software uses deep learning algorithms to compare images to a stored face print. The acceptance or rejection of a facial template response is dependent on the score falling above or below the threshold of the set, which is adjustable within the facial recognition system. The system produces a result that are considered probabilities, each with a percentile of how similar it is to a tested image. These probabilities are then evaluated and compared by people to confirm or deny the image. Please note, facial recognition technology does not produce matches, it produces probable results. The National Institute of Science and Technology research conducted in 2019 revealed that accuracy of facial recognition algorithms have improved more than 20 times since 2014. In its 2018 test, NIST found that 0.2% of searches in a database of 26.6 million photos failed to match the correct image, compared with 4% failure rate in 2014, which is a 20% improvement over 4 years. This technology is developing at an exponential rate, and it's addressing its weaknesses as it evolves. This is not to say that all of the concerns have been fully addressed, but it's to recognize that this is an evolving field of science. NIST highlighted that the often referenced Georgetown MIT studies using the 2014 algorithm that produced high error rates were not produced with modern technology. In other words, the focus was on false positives and false negatives without analysis of the algorithm used or the standards to which it was employed, the confidence threshold. I bring this up to make sure that when looking at the current research and how rapidly this field is changing, that we evaluate what is the current body of research and what may have been errors or weaknesses in previous studies. Success or failure of police use of facial recognition rests on policies and practice. It's essential for police to follow or exceed the Bureau of Justice Assistance recommended standards if a program is ever implemented in the city of Portland. The Information Technology and Innovation Foundation in 2018 noted that there were more than 80 nodal points of facial contour and a unique blueprint distinguishing individuals' biometrics. As neuroscientists suggest that no two faces are identical, with clear photo facial recognition can be more than 99% accurate. This is not dissimilar to fingerprints, the most closely related biometric technology used by police today. Countless testimonials have confirmed that facial recognition systems have led to arrests of dangerous perpetrators and missing and endangered individuals. In an article published in June of 2016 in the New York Times, Commissioner James O'Neill of the NYPD stated that the work of the facial recognition identification team led to the arrest of a man accused of raping a worker at a day spa, another charged with pushing a subway passenger onto the tracks. Agencies have made arrests in murders, robberies, and other crimes. In January 8th of 2020, Las Vegas police used facial recognition technology to identify Ernesto Cortez, 38, who had an outburst at an auto show near UNLV, where he assaulted the victim in front of his son, fracturing the victim's skull. This was a violent, stranger assault that would have been much more difficult to solve absent the labor-saving use of the technology. Anne Arundel County, Maryland, utilized facial recognition to help identify Warren Ramos as the suspect in a June 2018 mass shooting at the Capitol Gazette in Maryland, where 5 individuals were killed and many were wounded. While these are highlights of examples where facial recognition technology has helped policing, it is not to completely dismiss the community or the council's concerns. We see that if the technology evolves to a place where council is comfortable and we do implement a program, there are potential benefits. While the concerns over facial recognition technology misuses are reasonable, we should also look at the potential benefits to policing with this technology. Facial recognition technology has the potential to dispel or bring clarity to those who've been wrongfully convicted or accused. In short, it can help prevent misidentification when the technology evolves to a point that's appropriate. As technology continues to improve, it may mitigate and limit human bias. The algorithms employed in facial recognition technology are dispassionate and not the subject to the frailties of human recollection. According to the Innocent Project, 71% of its documented instances of false conviction are the result of mistaken witness identification. This technology could help significantly reduce or wholly remove that risk when the technology has evolved to the point that we're comfortable with it. Facial recognition has the potential to create significant efficiency gains. When properly used, facial recognition allows police to better manage resources of time and personnel hours. Days and hours spent otherwise searching through files for possible suspect photos and databases could be repurposed to other needed police services. Facial recognition technology can automate a process that people can already perform and efficiently narrow down a search to a limited subset. Again, it's worth reiterating here that facial recognition technology does not produce a match, but probabilities that require a person to confirm or deny the image. In these personnel resource lean times and in the interest of fiscal prudence, these potential efficiencies should not be discounted. Again, the Police Bureau is not seeking this technology currently, but rather I am discussing the path forward if we were to acquire this technology. If the Police Bureau were to use facial recognition technology, we would develop an oversight body and seek public input prior to any program implementation. Even if approved by an oversight body and council, the Bureau only recommends using facial recognition technology in a limited fashion with highly vetted facial recognition algorithms. We will limit the use to post hoc investigations of violent crimes. In other words, to violent crimes such as homicides, assaults, and robberies or sexual assaults that already occurred and there exists lawfully obtained imagery from a venue the unidentified person would have no reasonable expectation of privacy in. Images would only be compared to a limited database in accordance with the law. Facial recognition technology would not be used to generate standalone probable cause or the sole determinant when seeking probable cause. It would be used to help narrow down possibilities by searching through images to present possible persons, which would require human confirmation to verify. Confidence thresholds would need to be set to 99% or better, as is recommended for policing uses. At least 2 investigators would need to manually conduct confirmation through an additional independent review. If either independent review did not agree, the image would not be used as an investigative tool. Facial recognition technology would only be used by authorized and trained Police Bureau members who would only perform face recognition search during the course of lawful duties when, in accordance with applicable law, the individual's image was captured in a place where the individual had no reasonable expectation of privacy. The use of these lawfully acquired images would not differ than how we use these images when we release them in informational flyers or Crime Stoppers. The Oversight Committee, developed by and offering public input and accountability, would be established, as well as an annual report submitted to the Auditor's Office to ensure proper review and public trust. PPB would not use live monitoring. Only lawfully obtained images of suspects pursuant to an authorized criminal investigation would be used. Again, only those would be disseminated post-crime that you would see in a potential flyer. The Police Bureau would not use live monitoring, or what has been referred to as surveillance monitoring. Again, only lawfully obtained images pursuant to a crime. As this presentation is designed to discuss a possible future program, I want to reiterate we are not currently seeking to establish one. This potential policy restrictions are meant to be a high-level overview only to talk about what a program, if the council deems the technology appropriate, that we might pursue. Again, We're not asking for one. We haven't sought one. We weren't seeking one when these sessions came into being. So in conclusion, the Police Bureau would recommend that council pursue a moratorium instead of a ban. But if a ban is pursued, it would have language that would compel the city to review this matter periodically. The technology is advancing in this field, and an outright ban could be detrimental to a point when the technology evolves that we should be looking to adopt. It is recommended that the City Council seeks public opinion before making an ultimate decision, but whatever restriction is moved forwards, we would respect that, and we respect the wisdom of the council. The Police Bureau would also advise that any moratorium or ban have an exception for derivative products of facial recognition technology. The city cannot always control or be aware of what other governments do in regards to this technology. This is probably more acutely an issue for policing.
Yeah, you're over your time. Do you have a last statement you want to make?
The last statement would be that we would be concerned about derivative technologies. We can't always control what other agencies do. Our concern would be that we respect the wisdom of the council and the policy, but we could inadvertently find ourselves flying in face of the intent of the policy because we're mandated under certain state and federal laws to take enforcement action.
So may I thank you very much, Chief Lee. I appreciate that presentation. I want to challenge a little bit the assessment you made about the NIST research that was done last year. In fact, that study shows that Asian and African American people were up to 100 times more likely to be misidentified than white men. The improvement has only come with middle-aged white men and how they're able to effectively identify people using this technology. So you and I read the same report, and you and I came out with different data from that same NIT study.
Commissioner Arce, I understand your concerns and the points you're making. I don't know that we came out with different information. The point was that the technology is evolving substantially. In the same report, of particular interest to me, with Asians, if the algorithm was designed by an Asian corporation, one that is more familiar with the particular nuances of that ethnicity,
Right.
that error rate decreased. I think that as the industry is developing, now that they're aware of this weakness, they can seek the necessary input. My ask of council would be to put us in a position so that we can assess as this technology evolves. Not that this technology has necessarily evolved entirely to where the city of Portland should be adopting it.
I appreciate that, Chief, but I will also say that we need to be proactive as a city council, and we need to be proactive to ensure that we are not unwillingly having our data collected and sold and repurposed without our consent and permission. And so the issue is really bigger than police departments themselves. Have you had an opportunity to talk to some police departments that are currently using this technology as it relates to the Ring Door, quote-unquote, security system?
I have not talked to any departments that were using Ring Door information. I do know, I've read probably some of the same news articles you have. I would have concern about that. Again, if the Police Bureau were in a position, in the wisdom of council, to ever move forwards with a program, it would be against a closed set database. I don't see a future where we would want to be seeking it against, for lack of a better description, sort of internet images. I think that that is fraught with some error, especially when we start to look at what the value of those images are.
Right. Well, again, I want to thank you for your very thoughtful presentation. So what I hear is Portland Police Bureau today does not have this technology, A, and B is not asking for this technology. I also want to make sure that the public understands if we do a ban, we could also undo a ban if we had compelling evidence that, in fact, the technology has improved significantly. Because in my lived experience, if you start off with a racially inequitable outcome, you continue with it. And you can look across the board and see that that's true, right? So I don't want to support technology that has a built-in bias from the beginning. I'd much rather have an Asian Pacific Islander develop some algorithms or an African American, but it still would have to be 100% accurate. I would not want to put anybody in a position of having to disprove a technological thing. So that's my question.
If I could just make a comment, first of all, I think you mentioned 6 times during your presentation that you were not asking to use the technology. You have no plans to use the technology, but you also laid out what I thought was a very solid framework for how you would evaluate the technology and how you would deploy the technology if it got to the point where it was reliable. And I want to thank you for that because you did a little extra homework. And I would actually love to get a copy of that presentation so I could internalize that a little bit more. And I want to thank you as well, Lieutenant. I know you're sitting here because you probably did a lot of the work related to this. I know how that works. So thank you for that. And again, I want to reiterate something I said at the beginning. We should not be afraid of the technology any more than we're looking at other technologies that are cutting edge that are also not necessarily ready for prime time, like autonomous vehicles. And there have been other technologies in the past where we weren't really sure that it was ready for prime time, like the internet. Again, I don't want to get hung up on the terminology of ban versus moratorium. From my perspective as a city commissioner, as the mayor, it's the same thing. What we're basically saying is let's put the brakes on the widespread deployment of this technology, knowing that it is imperfect and that it can, particularly in a public safety situation or other situations, lead to some very significant negative consequences because it is still a rough technology. But we also acknowledge that in the future, as the technology develops, it could be very beneficial. And you laid out a couple of examples of how in a public safety context it could be beneficial. But I want to underscore we're a long way from there. And so our obligation here is to make sure we are protecting the interests of the public, and I thought your presentation thoughtfully reflected that, and I want to thank you for it.
Thank you, sir.
Mayor.
Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. I share Commissioner Hardesty's concerns and just want to elaborate on it a little bit. This is technology that was developed using white men as the standard, and therefore the outcomes for women and people of color or the mistaken identities are higher. So that study that you cited, NAST study, if that's based on a general population, which is half male and mostly white, then I'm not surprised that the misidentification is so low, but I do think if you break out the subgroups, I know if you break out the subgroups, you're going to see a higher rate of error. And, it may not sound like a big deal to a lot of people to be mistakenly identified. There's still a process that happens afterwards, but we know that mistake can be much more dangerous for some people than for others. And I'm really concerned that we would be creating an even more hostile environment for people in our community who are already experiencing kind of disparate impacts from multiple angles. So more of just a comment than a question. Because you're not asking for the technology today, I don't think I had some other questions about how transparency and accountability and what kind of agreements the Bureau would be willing to make with us, but we can save that for a later date.
It sounds like you'll come back to us when you believe the technology is developed to a point where there is an application. It sounds like you're making a public commitment that you would come back to the council to have that conversation. And it sounds like you also made a commitment to some public engagement and outreach on that.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And
The reason we have not sought this technology is because of the public concern.
And I assume we would also need some directives with regard to the deployment of the technology.
The policy
And go through that
piece would absolutely
process.
have to be in place, sir.
Thank you.
And Mayor, I will say that Smart Cities PDX has a plan for community engagement that will center the community in leading those conversations. And the Police Bureau will certainly be invited to participate in those conversations. But I don't want to set up the false illusion that we want the police to set up their own meetings. I'm sure they have enough meetings that they set up on their own. So
Just to clarify, particularly on the deployment of a new technology, I support a broader outreach. I was referring specifically to the directive process, which is carefully prescribed through city code.
I think we're a long way from that.
It's a both and. Both and.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Fritz, did you have any questions for this panel before we moved on? It's a delay.
No, thank you very much for asking.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you so
gentlemen.
much.
Appreciate it.
So much.
Thank you, AC. Thanks, Lieutenant.
Yep. So we will ask Jan Carson and Matt Cagle from ACLU Oregon to join us in the table, and I'll be happy to share the screen if you.
I'm sorry, are somebody's keys over here somewhere? You picked them up. Okay, great. I didn't want somebody to lose their car keys. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Just for clarification, this presentation is a 20-minute, is scheduled for 20 minutes, as were the police, which they did end up with their questions and stuff within the 20 minutes. Just want to be sure everybody knows what we're doing.
Is it a 10-minute presentation, a 10-minute question and answer again?
Um,
We're going to
depe-
talk for 20 minutes.
I'm not sure. Are you planning to talk for 20 minutes?
I think we should talk for
Whatever
10,
you want.
We have 10 minutes. For
Okay, I'll let you know when the time's up.
Yes, exactly. So 10 minutes and 10 minutes.
Very good. Sorry, your time's up. Next panel, please.
I just want to say I'm Jan Carson, the interim executive director with the American Civil Liberties Union of Oregon. I want to thank you for having such a thorough process with community input on this really serious topic and a conversation that is infused with equity. I think too often we opt for the promises of safety and efficiency over equity when we're considering technology. We opt for convenience and comfort for some over the true costs of human rights of living in a society where we are increasingly surveilled and tracked. I am not an expert in this, although the ACLU of Oregon has certainly worked with lots of state agencies trying to get privacy protections in place. I welcome that the city of Portland is embracing this, and we're really pleased to be part of this conversation. I have asked my colleague from the ACLU of Northern California to be here today because he gets to focus on this aspect of privacy and technology full-time. So,
Hello.
introduce yourself.
My name is Matt Cagle, and I'm an attorney with the ACLU of Northern California. Thank you so much for having me here today. Should we go into my presentation now? Excuse me. So a little bit of background about me. I'm focused on privacy and surveillance issues at the ACLU. I led the drafting of San Francisco's first of its kind ban on facial recognition technology used by government agencies, and I led the campaign along with my team and some civil rights partners to pass that law. That law has now been adopted by 6 other U.S. cities. And so with my few minutes, and I'm going to try to move quickly without speaking too quickly, I want to summarize some key civil liberties and civil rights concerns that the ACLU has with facial recognition technology, and identify some considerations that we think the council should have in mind as you think about how to move forward. And afterwards, we're happy to answer questions, of course. So as other speakers hinted at, and I won't get into the weeds on this too much, the reason we're here today is because computing power has increased substantially the last few years. The ability for computers to process large sets of images and to be able to identify our faces and create face prints has jumped leaps and bounds forward. At the same time, the cost of computing has gone down. So now we're seeing more and more vendors offering services to governments, to private actors, purporting to recognize faces. This gives companies and governments an unprecedented new power to identify us, with that power comes the ability to locate us if there are multiple cameras in a facial recognition system. And then, of course, if you're recording over time, and of course the cost of storage has gone down, one can identify somebody, locate somebody, but also track somebody across geography and across sort of chronology as time goes by. Could you move forward a few slides? Or that one is perfect. So the ACLU sees a few considerations that we'd like you to keep in mind and that we think it's important to keep in mind as you move down this path. The first is that corporate facial recognition and government facial recognition are not completely distinct. Corporations are developing facial recognition databases. 2 weeks ago, the New York Times reported on a company called Clearview that has taken our social media profile photos and as a private actor, as a venture capital funded company, is now turning and pitching that software to law enforcement agencies and governments. We think it's foreseeable that they would also try to sell this to companies at some point. So there's a definite sort of exchange of sort of commerce and information between the government sector and the private sector when it comes to facial recognition, and it's very difficult to completely disaggregate the two. At the same time, a company that's collecting facial scans of Portlanders walking into stores or other places of business is subject to government demands. We've seen in other quarters privately held surveillance databases become the target of subpoenas or demands from immigrations and customs enforcement, for example. And so it's important to think about the cross-pollination between these two, for lack of a better term, as the council moves forward on this issue. Could you go forward? So we also want to point out that right now, current data privacy law in the United States is largely inadequate to address the threat of facial recognition systems. There is no federal law governing facial recognition. We have laws in America on privacy issues that generally focus on specific areas. So we've all heard of HIPAA for health information, FERPA for some educational information, and the list goes on. Privacy laws tend to focus on a specific area of a sort of topic or sector. Whether or not that's good policy is a sort of debate for another day. We don't have a general right of privacy in the United States. So what that means is that there are significant gaps. There's no federal law on this topic. I'm not aware of a general Oregon law on this topic either, although there is, I believe, one law relating to body cameras and facial recognition that's not at issue today. And, you know, in this vacuum, states and localities are stepping up right now. In multiple states, there's moratoria and bans being proposed. California just banned the use of facial recognition and biometric surveillance on body cameras. New York, I believe Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts are also considering such laws. Some of them are focused more broadly. Others focus on the educational context, the use of this technology in housing, public housing specifically. But there isn't a law here in Oregon generally on this topic. Like I said, 6 other U.S. cities, in addition to San Francisco, have passed government bans. But we also have seen private regulation. There is now a 12-year-old law that was passed in Illinois called the Biometric Privacy Information Act, or Biometric Information Privacy Act. And what this law does is it says any private entity that wants to collect, use, or share biometric identifiers has to get informed written consent before they do so. This law has been really effective at pushing back on the sort of rampant, reckless collection of biometric information by corporations. It has a right of action, so companies like Facebook have been brought to court and forced to defend their scanning of people's faces without getting permission before the fact. So we think the Illinois law is a great model for thinking about how to empower Portlanders to really know when facial recognition is being used and be able to reject it if they don't want it to be used on them. Can we go forward again? The third point is going to be discussed, I think, a little bit more by following speakers. But we want to emphasize that this isn't just a conversation about accuracy or inaccuracy. You know, it's obvious to us at the ACLU that one false match is too many when you're talking about decisions to engage somebody as a law enforcement officer, a decision to arrest somebody and potentially even use force. It's also unacceptable that somebody might be turned away from a store or denied housing or a loan because their face was mismatched or they were on a list of disfavored persons. But even if these systems became perfectly accurate, if we assume that, they have very significant civil rights and civil liberties concerns. With my remaining time, I'll just summarize those briefly. So first is the sort of threat to privacy. A government or a corporation that can track us with perfect accuracy can know where we've been, who we associate with, whether we go to the liquor store or a doctor's appointment during the day, where we work, who is standing next to us at the Women's March or another sort of political protest. And this is sort of related to the issue of free expression and what it means for the deployment of facial recognition in our communities. We've seen stories from China already where You have town squares where previously there wasn't facial recognition. After it's installed, people are no longer coming there during the day to pray. Those town squares are now void of people. That chilling effect is not unique to the Chinese experience. Obviously, their government is different. But when people think they're going to be watched and potentially logged into a database, they are going to change their behavior. And that makes us less free and we would argue makes us less safe as well. So
Time. Thank you,
apologize for
Matt.
running over a little bit. Thanks for having us here today.
Thank you so much for that presentation. For my colleagues, the ACLU has been a strong partner with us from the beginning when we first started having conversations around facial recognition. Now that they've gone through some transition, so I'm very grateful that you were able to join us today and talk about your experience in San Francisco. We in this community really look to the ACLU because they traditionally are in the leadership around these kind of issues, and so we look forward to continuing to work with you around this. I want to talk about protests and how this surveillance could be or has been used around political activity. You may not know this, but Portland is known for protest, and with a presidential election coming up, I suspect we will have more than our fair share this year. Can you just give me a scenario where the potential danger if this technology existed right now for protest season?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, 4 years ago, the ACLU, we did records requests to learn about the government's use of surveillance systems that look at social media profile photos. And one of the records we got back was an advertisement from a surveillance company, and the surveillance company said, during the Freddie Gray protest, the protests of the police killing of Freddie Gray in Baltimore, we took photos from social media accounts, profile photos, photos of people just congregating on their accounts, and we ran that through facial recognition, and we used the results from that, those scans to go and arrest people who had been protesting. So this is not, a theoretical concern. This is now 4 years. I believe the protests were prior to 2016 when we obtained the records. And so this is following a historic pattern we've seen with other surveillance technologies where they're disproportionately and often primarily or sort of right out of the gate turned against Black and brown people, immigrant communities. And so we should expect the same with facial recognition if it's deployed. And frankly, we have examples of it being deployed in that way.
Thank you. You've scared me enough.
Commissioner Taylor. Sorry.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
I have received very little constituent contact on this issue. The only pushback I've gotten on what we're talking about today is from private businesses, maybe such as banks who have a higher risk of violent crime, or malls where they're struggling to manage a lot of people in a space. I would like to hear ACLU's position on private ban or more on that.
Well, it's our view that Portlanders should not have their faces or biometrics scanned without their knowledge and without their consent. But what we are seeing is that more private corporations are moving towards considering the use of facial recognition. We would argue that in many cases, if we stood back from those proposals, facial recognition is not only unnecessary to achieve the sort of goals of security, but it can actually be counterproductive if you're using algorithms that are inaccurate, if you're building sensitive databases that can be breached or subject to government demands or sold by the vendor to a third-party data broker. There are sort of privacy and security concerns that you invite when, as a company or business, you bring in one of these systems. And then, of course, right now, many of these systems are inaccurate. So you can imagine a system denying somebody access to a bank where they go to obtain a home loan or a business loan because their face was mistakenly placed on a list of people who should not be allowed into financial institutions, or was correctly placed by somebody who was deliberately placing them on a list and motivated by bias.
Thank you for that. I'm in agreement. I just wanted someone to say it out loud.
Great question.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fritz, did you want to weigh in?
And I do absolutely agree that there should be express consent, and it would be really interesting to see how that would impact people wanting to come into businesses if they had to give consent to facial recognition.
I don't have any questions. This seems very straightforward to me.
Thank you, Commissioner. I was going to say, we have that Jack's, what is it, grocery store or convenience store? What's it called? Jackson's, which we had one location, and now they want to expand to 2 additional locations where they have facial recognition to enter the store, and they have their own internal undesirable list. But they cannot articulate what it takes to get on their undesirable list. And so I can just imagine how that could be misused and very clearly, right? Because does it depend on if I have a suit, I'm worthy. If I am houseless, I'm unworthy. I mean, I just see all kind of ways that would be abused. Have you seen this kind of technology for going to a convenience store in San Francisco and other locations that you've been in?
We've seen anecdotal news stories about businesses looking into using facial recognition technology, but there's a lot we don't know right now. One of the slides I didn't unfortunately have time to get to, the ACLU, we asked 20 top Fortune 500 sort of retailers a few years ago, are you using facial recognition in your stores? Of the 20, only 2 would even respond to us and tell us whether they were using it or not.
Wow.
And so we're really in the dark as the public right now. And what's happening in that sort of vacuum of transparency and oversight is that you have companies pitching their wares to stores with sort of shiny brochures and the potential secretive rollout of these technologies in public places and public businesses.
Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So in our agenda, we have a 10-minute break now. So we will reconvene at 10:35, 34. Thank
All
you.
right, we're in recess.
Sense where that sound's coming from. I think it's coming from one of these 2 mics.
We're back. We're back. We're better than before.
All right.
And Commissioner Fritz, again, just ping me if you want to ask a question.
Thank you so much
Will
for
do. Thank you.
coming back. Let's.
Compliment Judith Mallory for being an excellent timekeeper. Thank you. Because we could be here forever if you were not as good at that. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. This second part of this work session is dedicated, it's an open space for our community and public organizations, part of our community in general. So we try to bring some of those voices who have been participating with us. We recognize that those are not the only voices in town. We recognize also that we still need a lot of work to do to make this outreach, to outreach our community. This is just a part of this long journey. And with no further ado, I would like to invite to the table Darren Harold Golden from Urban League and Alan Hippolito from Verde.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Good morning. Oh, thanks, Con. Thank you.
Morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Mayor. So Alan was not given a slot, so he will be testifying after me. Yeah, sharing my 10 minutes. I was going to ask if it's okay with you if we go a little over our 10 minutes since we are sharing that presentation. That's all I'm saying. We were told 20 overall.
That will leave time for questions. It's a 20-minute total spot on the agenda.
That's fine.
Okay.
Go for it.
I'll give you each a 5-minute warning, though, so you know where you are in
Awesome.
space and time.
That'd
Thank
be
you.
helpful. Thank you, Judith.
My name is Darren Harold Golden. I'm a policy specialist for the Urban League of Portland. Our mission is to empower African Americans and other Oregonians to achieve equality in education, employment, and economic security. We were founded in 1945, and we are part of the larger national organization that was founded in 1910. This makes this year our 75th anniversary.
Yeah.
I would like to say that good government and good governance does not wait to hear horror stories from its people about the ills that exist within its purview. Instead, it is proactive in its approach to harmful issues so that people will not have horror stories to tell. We have a chance to make this happen in Portland. In the 2014 United States Supreme Court case, Riley v. California, Justice Alito stated, "It would be very unfortunate if privacy protection in the 21st century were left primarily to the federal courts, using the blunt instrument of the Fourth Amendment. Because of this, we must move quickly to enact legislation ensuring the privacy of Portland." It is difficult to find a good place to start while addressing this bad technology because there are so many stories and so much data as of recently that one could inundate themselves for weeks reading through it. That being said, technology isn't inherently good or bad, simply a byproduct of its makers. The Black experience in America is a byproduct of slavery, disenfranchisement, and institutionalization. James Baldwin once said, "To be a Negro in this country and be relatively conscious is to be enraged almost all of the time." It is upsetting that I must sit here and advocate on behalf of my community, once again, on the ills of capitalism, because that is all this is. I could quote the New York Times, the Washington Post, Georgetown Law, Southern Poverty Law Center, Vice, BuzzFeed, etc. You know how this goes, about the impacts of FRT. I was asked to present local stories on how this tech has impacted the people. While I believe that voice is absolutely necessary, I do not believe I am the conduit for that voice. You, as the governing body, needs to hold open and accessible sessions and forums and public spaces to hear the voices of the community from their own mouths. I cannot sufficiently convey all of their voices, to which I'd like to commend Smart Cities as they have already reached out to set up public work sessions and forums. Further, it would be impossible to even scratch the surface of the magnitude of harm biases played throughout the Black, brown, and low-income communities in Portland and across the nation. Following that, I find it important to state that 2 to 3 minutes for each citizen in a public forum is not nearly long enough to express the pain that these communities have endured at the hands of an oppressive society. The Council has a difficult yet simplest decision ahead of it, enacting the strongest possible ban on FRT to protect the safety, privacy, and anonymity of Portlanders, specifically those of our Black and brown communities that experience bias from a plethora of different arenas. When asked about the recent study on bias in FRT published by the National Institute of Standards, the one that Portland Police was referring to, Senator Wyden stated, Algorithms often carry all the biases and failures of human employees, but with even less judgment. Later following up stating, any company or government that deploys new technology has a responsibility to scrutinize their product for bias and discrimination at least as thoroughly as they'd look for bugs in the software. The burden should fall upon the companies looking to promote and sell this technology to prove that it is not biased in any way. This responsibility should not and cannot fall on the public. In a 2018 study titled Gender Shades, Intersectional Accuracy Disparities in Commercial Gender Classification, led by Joy Bulamwini, a computer science and algorithmic bias expert at MIT, it was found that Microsoft, IBM, and Face++, China's open data platform, are all biased. A couple key findings. All algorithms performed better on male versus female results, with an 8.1 to 20% error rate for that. All algorithms perform better on white faces versus dark faces, with a 20 to 34% error rate. The same algorithms only presented a 0.1% error rate on lighter male faces at the most. If a contractor told you the roof was less than 1% likely to fail, you'd say, of course, build it. If that contractor's partner came to you and told you that that same roof actually had a 20 to 35% fail rate, I promise you, you would not say yes. Critics will point to these tests and try to poke holes in the results that are presented or state that there are only a couple out of a dozen or hundreds of algorithms, to which I state, even if you create a perfect algorithm, it is still run on systems created out of bias. Inaccurate algorithms will be run on a black-heavy mugshot database created through age-old patterns of bias policing. It is no secret that African Americans are arrested and incarcerated at 5 times the rate when compared to all other ethnicities, especially white people. If you need me to follow up with this information, I'm happy to support it. Now, if I told you that same roof was 100% structurally sound, but leaked 5 times as much as the next roof, I promise you would still not buy it. Further, FRT is a civil rights issue as equally as it is a civil liberties issue. It will have the largest impact on black and brown people. Legislation must keep racial justice at the forefront, along with the potential Bill of Rights and other amendment violations. Police can't individually fingerprint every person in a crowd. They also cannot walk through that crowd and demand that each person produces a driver's license, but they can scan their faces remotely and in secret and identify each person using FRT. The constitutional issues that present themselves regarding FRT are also plentiful. Sadly, I do not have enough time to address that, while luckily ACLU did a good job of that. I think it would be a mistake to believe that the only thing that needs to be fixed for this to work are the algorithms. The fact of the matter is that the issues this technology will present are much deeper reaching than simply a perfect algorithm. They involve matters of privacy, constitutional rights, and gender and racial bias. Something I haven't had time to touch on, but I want you to think about. How does an algorithm discern between an adult and a child? What happens to that child's facial data, identity, and information? Where will that information be stored? Who will have access to it? Where will it be sold? Lastly, how can a child possibly consent to the surveillance? Thank you.
Thank you. Morning, Al.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to add value to your discussion today, and thank you to Darren for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. My name is Alan Ibolito. I serve as Director of Special Projects for Verde, a nonprofit organization in Northeast Portland's Cully neighborhood. Per its tax-exempt mission, Verde serves communities by building environmental wealth through social enterprise, outreach, and advocacy. By and of frontline communities, Verde was founded for 2 reasons. First, sustainability. Despite a foundational commitment to equity, it had not engaged and was not directly benefiting low-income people and people of color. And second, these frontline communities lacked capacity, including public and philanthropic investments, to plan their own environmental futures. Since then, you know a little about the good work we've done together to bridge this green divide and to reinterpret sustainability as an anti-poverty strategy. We did this by building capacity in community, and by that capacity, co-created environmental investments for and with low-income people of color communities in response to their priorities. With that in mind, you might wonder, why is Verde here at a council work session on facial recognition technology? First, we are seeing technology emerge as a growing barrier to our ability to address this green divide. That technology concerns are preventing low-income people and people of color in Cully from accessing environmental benefits and services. And I'll address this in more detail shortly. Second, we as an organization are racing, like many are, to respond to technology's broader negative impacts on our frontline communities. In fact, this is one of the main reasons I'm not Verde's executive director anymore. I stepped down in 2018 because the pace and impact of technological change meant that we needed to increase the time, effort, organizing, and advocacy we gave to digital justice issues. We're working hard with community to co-create platforms for digital organizing, advocacy, and enterprise, and we, like many frontline community-serving organizations, are already very late to the game. Looking around, we found ourselves experiencing a new but very familiar divide between Portland's technology stakeholders and the needs and priorities of its low-income and people of color communities. These frontline communities are technologically marginalized. They're left out of a larger data-rich society, not just by poverty, not just because they can't afford it, but by stakeholders who either exploit our communities or treat them as afterthoughts, a box to be checked after early adopters, business models, and other policy priorities have been realized, and by public and private funders who too often fail to incent or resource our frontline community-facing organizations to create just technologies for and with the communities they serve. As a result, other frontline communities and the organizations that serve them suffer from low technology capacity. So today I want to first recognize that you have a challenging decision ahead. And let me be clear, the challenge is not because the right decision is difficult. The risks versus benefits of a ban are being presented here and throughout the world very plainly, and this argues for an aggressive and declarative response. What I mean is that Portland, like a lot of other jurisdictions, is challenged as a government to make tech policy, to govern in the basic sense of promoting health, safety, general welfare, et cetera, with and for its residents with regard to matters of technology. You're challenged to make quick decisions in the face of sudden, urgent technology issues, while at the same time lacking systems and structures for more informed, routine, and inclusive policymaking. Instead of a well-designed system to govern in the face of rapid technological change, we have a patchwork of activities and staff spread across multiple bureaus. You have frontline community-serving organizations racing to get caught up and weigh in, and you're devoting 2 council work sessions, 4 hours of your valuable council time to a single technological issue. So after you pass these bans, we must immediately do the work of building that governing capacity, and we must begin by investing in those communities on the front lines of technological change so they can be central participants in making that change happen. Because there will be more issues to come, especially because technology companies, as was referenced, are experienced in taking advantage of this disorganization to drive policymaking that supports their business models. So plainly, in this kind of urgent and sudden circumstance, you must default to the safety of Portlanders and enact the strongest public and private bans you can legally justify, and following, you can set up a deliberative process and engage a broad community of informed stakeholders to further review and potentially revise the policy. Weigh the harms against the benefits. If you later try to strengthen a 2-week FRT ban, individual community members will already have suffered at the hands of the technology, perhaps irreparably, and business pushback will be even stronger because they'll already be making real money from it. If you later try to walk back a too strong FRT ban, then you'll have ensured the safety and welfare of Portlanders while merely delaying a revenue opportunity. And as you've already heard today, safety and welfare are at stake, especially for low-income and people of color Portlanders. We shouldn't be surprised. Tech folks often talk about early adopters, those who are first to see opportunity in new technology. Well, racism and inequality are the original early adopters. They take the first seats at the table anytime we create something new, turning technology into a tool that increases systemic disparities. It's well established that technological advances tend to increase disparities between the haves and the have-nots. Advantages are pressed, vulnerabilities are deepened. Ask Native Americans and Chinese immigrants about railroads. Ask Black folks in the South about the cotton gin, or Portland's Black community about automobiles and freeways. Ask Pacific Islanders about splitting the atom. Most of these oppressions were carried out in the name of progress, which is mostly a euphemism for making money, and one that is often used by those opposing the kind of protective action you're exploring today. So please, don't let yourself fall under the spell of words like progress. and innovation. They're well-rehearsed taglines advanced by the tech sector whenever governments begin making noise about holding them accountable for their shortcomings and to impacted communities. And you should skeptically question these assertions of innovation by asking, innovation for whom? Because 50 years after Xerox PARC, 46 years after the tech sector started setting up shop in Portland region, we're still waiting for the anti-poverty and racial justice innovations from Portland's technology stakeholders. We're still waiting for an innovative Portland technology sector with racial demographics that bear a passing resemblance to the broader Portland community. We're still waiting for tech companies with business models that innovate by centering low-income people and people of color as early adopters and primary beneficiaries. I'll close by returning to Verity's mission, our daily work with the city and peer organizations to build environmental wealth in low-income and people of color communities, and to address the climate crisis in the only way that's been proven to work, by centering communities on the front lines of climate change as leaders, policymakers, and beneficiaries. Already, technology barriers to accessing electric vehicles and other key greenhouse gas emission reduction measures are challenging these climate goals. 2018, Verity Hacienda CDC and Forth developed the Living Cully Mobility Assessment to guide a clean mobility feature at Hacienda CDC's new affordable housing project, Las Adelitas. We engaged nearly 200 residents through bilingual surveys and a focus group. Almost uniformly, they told us transportation in Cully needed to improve, and they had specific suggestions for the kinds of transportation options they wanted. They wanted shared electric vehicles. They wanted shared e-bikes and scooters. They wanted a community shuttle. We're working hard to make those options available at Las Adelitas. But they also told us, in addition to cost challenges, they told us about their technology and privacy concerns, that they were very uncomfortable linking their financial information to a transportation app. We're working hard to overcome those barriers at Las Adelitas. But with a week ban, how long will it be before facial recognition technology makes its way into these transportation options? Without improved and inclusive technological decision-making and governance, how long will it be before other digital privacy risks, unacceptable to our growing frontline communities, make their way into our climate actions? And how will we ever address the climate crisis by technologically excluding our most impacted communities? I urge you to pursue the strongest public and private FRT bans permitted by law, and then consequently build an inclusive technology governing capacity that gives us the ability to respond to urgent technology issues, as well as imagine a just and community-centered digital future. Thank you.
Thank you. And gentlemen, could we get copies of your
Absolutely.
presentations? I have a
have
couple of
about 5 minutes
ideas
for
related to
questions.
this and also unrelated to this. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to see those copies. Thank you.
Is there someone we should email to, or does someone
Yeah,
tell us how to do
to
that?
us.
Figure it out.
To us,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
so
Both
much,
of you.
both of you, for your presentation. I want to really appreciate the Urban League's leadership because you've been with us from the very beginning, tackling this issue. Do you believe that the process that we currently have in place to engage the broader community around this proposal is sufficient? And if not, what's the missing piece that would help engage our communities at a deeper level so they really understand the choices that we're having?
I believe that Hector and Smart Cities' plan for the future is a great start to how you engage the community more broadly. However, I believe that facial recognition technology is extremely harmful to these communities and that it needs to be banned. And like Alan said, then we can look at walking back that ban down the road. But that engaging communities takes time, and we don't have the time to respond to that.
No, I appreciate that, and I will say it over and over and over again. The ban doesn't mean we will never, ever in the city of Portland have facial recognition technology. It means that we are mindful of the impact that this technology will have on communities, especially communities of color, who are consistently misidentified using this technology. So I just need to keep saying that so that people don't think, oh my gosh, they're just banning it forever. This city council, if next year you two got together and created some technology that was superb, we could certainly come back and actually walk back from the ban. But I think the ban will send a strong message to the industry that they can no longer send out half-baked schemes and expect us to be the subjects of the experiment, and then be shocked that it doesn't work the same if you're not a white middle-aged man. For everybody else. So it's really important that we are very mindful and very proactive on this. That's all.
I just had another thought. As I was listening to your presentations, and by the way, they were both just, I think you hit the nail on the head. And what I would actually like to suggest we think about, I was thinking, particularly Alan, as you were talking about how valuable it would be to convene the Technology Association of Oregon and others and have them hear that presentation and have a conversation about the examples you gave and the concerns that you expressed and the inequity that's inherent in the adaptation of new technologies historically. I think there's a bridge building opportunity here. And both of you, your comments resonated very, very strongly with me. And I appreciate you obviously took a lot of time to think about what you wanted to present to us today. It was meaningful. Thank you.
I think there's a real opportunity to build that partnership after we pass the ban, because quite frankly, people who are looking to make bucket loads of money off of their invention are going to want us to trust them until they get it right. And I think the ban gives us a great opportunity to be a convener and then say, now how do we make sure as we move forward, we are actually developing something that is racially equitable, and ensures that community members have to give consent before any data is collected on them. So I appreciate what you said, Mayor, but I think that we have to do the ban first, and then I'll be much more willing to talk about, let's figure out how we move back from the ban.
Well, listen, I obviously agree with the urgency, or I wouldn't bring this forward. But I also want to be clear, I believe there are allies in our technology community who would agree with and support the principles that you've just put out here on the table in this work session. And so I'm not suggesting we slow this down interminably, and I agree that there is urgency and we have to get to the nub of the matter. I believe there is a convening and a conversation that really has not happened overtly that needs to happen, and I think this is exactly the community to have that conversation. So if there is that opportunity and you would have an interest, I most certainly would. That was my point.
If I might articulate one note there, please. I think, as we've been engaging in this technology work at the community level, that's really been our initial focus, right? We have had from time to time someone come to us and say, hey, I know this company or this association that you should talk to about your work in community around increasing access to these services, protecting digital privacy of low-income, of affordable housing residents, what have you. And we've been very, I think, diligent and purposeful to say our main responsibility right now is to invest in the community. To provide the community with the tools and resources and capacities so they can say what they want from the technology and from the industry, rather than begin in a very power imbalance situation where we don't have a clear idea at the community level of what we want. And so if we don't have a clear idea of what we want, then a lot of times you end up with somebody else's idea. So that's not to dismiss the suggestion, because I think it's valuable, but I think it also underscores or argues the need for deeper investment in communities so they can articulate what an equitable, justice-based relationship with the technology industry would look like.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, Commissioner Fritz?
And
Yeah.
Commissioner Daly, I think.
I'm just trying to limit my comments so we can keep this moving along, but I'll just say, in the absence of federal regulation, it's up to cities to protect their residents' civil rights and to protect communities that are most likely to be harmed. And I think these companies are acting with reckless abandon and absolutely know they do not have the best interest of our residents at heart. They have their own interests, and So I agree with Commissioner Hardesty that we need to do the ban, and then they can come have the conversations with community and try to sell us on the merits of their and benefits of their product. So I really appreciate your input, but I didn't have any questions for you because you guys did such a great presentation.
Thank you for the support.
Thank you, appreciate it very much.
Absolutely.
Yep, thank you. Yeah,
So we're running late. I just want to point out, we have two more presentations, so we're scheduled for 40 minutes, but we only have 30 minutes till the end of the work session, so I just want to put that out and see how people would like to deal with that.
Okay, so one idea, this is, we are always a resource, our Smart City program is always a resource for the community, so please, we understand this is a very short period of time, and we can follow up after that. So I would like to ask to join us to this table, Eric Vega, representing Portland Immigrants' Rights Coalition, and Babatunde Atsubuike, who's coming from Freedom to Thrive, to share the presentation.
And could we keep the presentations to 10 minutes so that if we have questions?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. They had asked for extra time and sounded like we agreed. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much.
And it was compelling. I just have time.
Good morning, welcome.
Morning. Thank you, thank you.
Oh, sure.
Good to see you too. So thank you all for having me today to speak about the issues around the facial recognition technology. As stated, my name is Babatunde Azubuike. I'm the programs coordinator for Freedom to Thrive. Freedom to Thrive works to build a world where safety means investment in people and the planet, and an end to punishment-based criminal and immigration systems. I'm excited to be here to talk to y'all about why we need a public ban on facial recognition technology, as the technology is right now. Most of my work centers providing civic engagement and leadership development opportunities with those who come from Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. I also work with mainly young Black women, femmes, youth, and the LGBTQ population. It's through that work that we ground our dialogues on experiences, dignity, and impact. So facial recognition is touted to be one of the top 3 methods of biometric recognition to identify people by measuring some aspect of individual physiology or anatomy. The most well-known techniques include fingerprints, iris, palm, and DNA recognition. Facial recognition is the fastest growing biometric technology and expected to grow to $7.7 billion by 2022. This is because facial recognition has a wide range of commercial applications and is super easy to set up, so a lot of people are rushing into that. It can also be used to anything from surveillance to target marketing. Facial recognition technology commercializes and monetizes dangerous surveillance tools that merely increase the state's ability to monitor and track Black and Indigenous communities of colors. This technology is not not designed to prevent crime, but rather designated to escalate racial profiling by state programs where individuals make assumptions about people of color, people experiencing homelessness, and other marginalized communities. Numerous studies have indicated that facial recognition technology is highly error-prone and inaccurate when identifying faces of darker-skinned people. In addition to that, transgender people, gender nonconforming people, and women. This technology will undoubtedly increase the suspected criminalities of communities of color, resulting in more false misidentifications and potentially harmful interactions with the police. African American women have the highest numbers for being inaccurately identified, as much as a 35% error rate. As Commissioner Hardesty mentioned, African Americans, Asians, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders are also misidentified, as well as youth and elders. And Black women elders are the largest growing population of people in jail coming out too. This technology digitalizes racial profiling while perpetuating the routine criminalization and over-policing that our communities of color already face, weaponizing racism with technology. In a test conducted by the ACLU, the facial recognition technology used by Amazon, known as Rekognition, spelled with a K, incorrectly matched the photos of 28 members of Congress with the mugshots of individuals with previous arrests. Alarmingly, these false matches also disproportionately identified 6 members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Police violence against Black and Indigenous people is at an all-time high, and we cannot allow lawmakers to ignore how facial recognition programs and increased homeland security often result in potentially violent interactions with the police. Currently, there are 600 law enforcement agencies that are using this technology nationwide. I find this incredibly disturbing since none of this technology is ever 100% accurate. We are still in the very early stages of this technology, and yet across the board, many organizations, agencies, and concerned citizens are raising their voices about this technology that is little more than automated discrimination. The impact of this potential misidentification on everyday people can result in denial of employment, housing, and other benefits. My effort is to hold officials accountable to ensure that this racially biased and invasive technology does not further oppress and harm our communities. As stated by other folks, cities like San Francisco, Oakland, and Somerville, Massachusetts have already banned the use of facial recognition, and I also call for a public ban for the sake of our communities.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Good morning.
Hi, my name is Eric Vega. I'm representing the Portland Immigrant Rights Coalition. I appreciated your use of the word urgency because I think there is a kind of drift, a kind of slide that is occurring. In a recent New York Times article about Clearview that somebody else had a comment on, the shift goes something like this. LAPD is using 47 million kind of hits. Then you look at Florida, and they're using, 8 million at LAPD. Florida uses 47, and then Clearview jumps up to 3 billion. So something is happening here. When we're talking about this facial recognition technology, we have to be thinking about the myriad other ways in which we are moving towards a surveillance state, in which both the state and private interests are merging their data collection and trying to find every click, every photograph, every DNA sample, every way to create a profile of each one of you and each person that is watching this testimony today. I think it's clear that match and misidentification are clearly problems. The Human Rights Center, the Gender Studies Study, the National Institute of Standards, I mean, there's evidence that but here's the problem. Technology is not neutral, although people want to say that it is neutral and that there's a certain facile way of interpreting it as neutral. It carries with it power relations and history. History has long fingers, and that's what I want to try to talk about a little bit. But I did want to note that China apparently has some 200 million cameras on its population. And that is not just because people like to take pictures of kitty cats. What we're talking about here is that the Uyghur population and some hundreds of thousands of people are ethnically profiled. And it's connected to this idea that they may be alien or they may be terrorists. And I think that we need to really be thinking about, we are living in a period of time in which that is uppermost in the minds of many people who are trying to organize a right-wing movement in this country. And that means something. For me, I think it is the case that race, ethnicity, and white supremacy have played a crucial role in how this country developed and its institutions. Very quickly, the 1790 Naturalization Act said the only people that can become citizens naturally, by way of naturalizations, were white people. This was interpreted through a number of Supreme Court cases, but you, in a parallel way, are probably familiar with one of the most famous, the Dred Scott decision, that basically said we did not think of you black people as being citizens. The fugitive slave laws, which in many ways acts as the kind of birthplace for modern law enforcement, is basically about tracking property that is trying to run. That's where police come from. So we have a tragic history of white supremacy that has a real influence on how our institutions and how our methods are operationalized in this country. I wanted to talk about this idea of enemy aliens. Noted scholar David Cole has talked about how, by way of the internment of Japanese Americans, by way of the Chinese exclusion, over and over, in case after case, you can see there is a desire to make the alien, the person who comes from another country, as the enemy. When I was a child, I picked tomatoes with my family, and one of the things that many of the Mexican population were concerned about was the migra. And one of the jokes was, do we have some kind of invisible letter on our forehead? Because I held hearings in Sacramento, California, where I'm from. It was about racial profiling. And over and over and over again, not just a couple times, but many people in the community said, I'm not crazy. I'm not paranoid. People are following me. People are watching me. When I drive and I am black, I'm going to be pulled over. When I'm driving and I'm brown, they're going to pull me over. You have to believe me that we're being surveilled all the time. So I want to bring that kind of sense of things, that is the psychology and that is the backdrop for our thinking about. Because what we could be talking about here is racial profiling on steroids, becoming simply more sophisticated, and with a large population of people who are saying,
You're just about done. Sorry.
I'm sorry too.
It's okay, you can come back.
Okay.
You won't be banned.
That's 5.
It's up? Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. What fabulous testimony. I thank you both. Also, as the mayor's asked before, could we get copies of your written testimony? I know neither of you were able to get through all of it.
Yeah, and I'm disappointed because I was sort of on the edge of my seat waiting to see how this story ends.
I'd be
So
willing to give
Clearly,
up
this is a
questions.
professor, right? Because he actually knows how to engage us and keep us just waiting for what's next. Is there an important point, sir, that you were hoping to be able to make, but because of our limited time, you were not able to? We will give you a time to make.
yeah, I'd like to hear
With your
that.
permission, just two
Please.
other things.
Yeah.
One was that the Trump administration, at the beginning of this year, instituted a new policy, which is any person that is detained is now going to have a DNA swab, which runs counter when you think about this. Historically, some felons, then more felons, then all felons, yes? But what we're talking about here is essentially an infraction, and now all people who have gotten a ticket are going to be swabbed. This is something that we need to be really seriously thinking. We're in a drift and a slide towards something that is very troubling. And you're not paranoid if people are watching you. Yes? The other part is I agree with everything that Babatunde and others have said. I think perhaps an advisory council on this issue might be in order. I can't remember if Hector has spoken to this before, but something that brings together marginalized and people of color to advise. And then the discussion, the larger discussion, I think should emphasize potential hazards. We don't have to step into a dystopian future, but if we're not careful, we are already in it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you both.
I tell you, you guys know how to silence us. It's kind of like, very excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thank you.
for your presentation. And again, we are a resource. We are open for communications. And for those who are joining remotely, please keep in mind, visit our website, that's the commercial, www.smartcitypdx.com, and reach out to us. I would like to invite now John Isaacs from Portland Business Alliance and Skip Newberry from Technology Association of Oregon. Please join, and if you could take these 2 seats.
Well, good morning. I took some liberties with your organization earlier. I didn't even see you sitting over there.
I'm good for being voluntold what to do.
There you go. Good morning.
morning.
Thank you both for being here.
So I think I'm going first, right?
Yes.
Yep, okay. Here, I brought copies that you
Okay.
can hand around.
Thanks, John.
So I'm going to go first because I'm going to speak sort of from a broad business community perspective, explain the process that we went through to come up with the comments today, and then I think you're going to go deeper from the technology industry specific perspective.
Great, thank you.
So Honorable Mayor Wheeler and City Council members, thank you very much for inviting us to participate today. My name's John Isaacs. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Portland Business Alliance. The Portland Business Alliance is Greater Portland's Chamber of Commerce and represents the largest, most diverse network of businesses in the region. The Alliance advocates for business at all levels of government to support commerce, community health, and the region's overall prosperity. We represent more than 1,900 members from 27 counties, 13 states, and virtually every industry sector. More than 80% of our members are small businesses. As you know, the Alliance has several policy committees open for participation to all members. The committees focus on different areas of policy and examine how they impact business, the overall economy, and the community. These committees provide direction and make recommendations to our Government Relations Committee for official Alliance positions on important proposals being considered at all levels of government. Our Technology and Innovation Committee has been examining the facial recognition issue for several months with members from a variety of industries and sectors participating. We have worked closely with the Technology Association of Oregon in establishing this committee, but as I've communicated to you before, technology and quote-unquote tech jobs are no longer just with technology companies. Most employers now have at least one tech-related employee or have entire tech departments. Virtually all businesses use advanced technology of some kind to operate, and more than half of tech jobs are with companies outside of the technology sector. After several meetings, including discussions with staff from Commissioner Hardesty's office, which we greatly appreciated, the Technology and Innovation Committee succeeded in developing a set of principles for you and the council to consider when reviewing and developing ordinances regulating the use of facial recognition or other biometric technologies. I'm here to present them today. We appreciate the mayor, the council, and the city for including the business community and voice in these discussions and hope these principles will be taken into consideration when developing these proposals. First, technology is not inherently good or bad. It has specific potential uses which can be problematic and may need to be regulated. The Alliance encourages you to design any proposal to focus on the inappropriate uses of technology and not an outright ban. Focusing on regulating technology uses we all agree are not acceptable still allows the city and community to realize the benefits of certain technologies. Banning specific technologies can be a fast and slippery slope, leading to more bans on technologies that government doesn't fully understand and can be minimally effective since technological innovation and development moves so much faster than government. Second, consider the impact on our rapidly expanding local technology industry. Portland has a strategic advantage in tech. After years of struggling to retain these companies locally, high-growth companies are finally able to raise significant investment dollars without succumbing to pressure to leave Portland. A ban on any technology will be viewed to some extent as an anti-tech industry action and will have a negative impact on the perception of Portland as a growing tech hub. 3, technology that is used to discriminate or is not capable of avoiding bias based on any human characteristic is not acceptable. The Alliance would support a proposal that focuses on preventing any technology for this use. 4, data should not be collected and used for commercial purposes without consent. We agree that Portland residents should not have to worry that their biometric data is being unknowingly collected for commercial use in the public right-of-way, so if they're walking down the sidewalk. We would support a proposal that prevents the use of biometric technology of any kind for these purposes, not just facial recognition technology. 5, any use of technology should be regulated, not banned, in private places of business. Our members strongly believe their customers, as well as the general public, expect and support the use of the most modern technology to ensure safety and the best experience while in a private business. However, in addition to preventing certain uses, our members agree the use of surveillance or biometric technology should be transparent and the data collected should be kept private. We would support a proposal that requires the disclosure of the use of any surveillance technology, again, not just facial recognition technology, and the disclosure of how data is being stored and used. Our members are not supportive of any proposed regulation of the use of this technology at private residents. That was the one area they were clear they just didn't support. We appreciate, again, being included in this conversation today. The Alliance and our members are committed to working together with you and all stakeholders we heard from today to develop an ordinance that incorporates and balances all perspectives, is broadly supported by the public, and works for the entire community. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Great. Mayor Wheeler, members of City Council, my name is Skip Newberry. I'm President and CEO of the Technology Association of Oregon. We represent about 500 tech and tech-enabled companies, predominantly around Oregon, but the vast majority are here in Portland. So we appreciate the time and attention that the city has been giving over the years to a lot of really important issues around data privacy, data governance, issues of transparency, bias, equity, and human rights as well. We've been involved in a lot of those discussions, especially around the open data program, Smart City PDX, as well as the more recent privacy and information protection principles adopted this past spring by the council. We're also involved currently with the Oregon Attorney General's Data Privacy Task Force, which is looking at statewide data privacy legislation for the 2021 session. So in terms of our thoughts on the city's proposed ban regarding facial recognition technology, we are, looking at kind of the old maxim in terms of technology, which is that, bad data in produces bad data out on the other side of it. And, Smart City PDX has definitely looked into some examples where in the past few years, different commercially available applications have definitely resulted in bias, right? As has been discussed earlier, there was an MIT study cited where some of the facial recognition technology had used data that was overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male to train the artificial intelligence that's the basis of the technology. And so even at the time the article was published, some of the facial recognition technology solutions have started to rework using more diverse data sets. So there's definitely a growing awareness that there's a problem out there. There's bias, and efforts are being taken to kind of address that. I'm also pleased to hear the council is open to reevaluating this evolving technology over time. Identity verification in particular is a major challenge really all over the world. And if we look at examples where in recent years some of the technologies that were used in that MIT study have been used, one interesting case study is with people who are trying to access and build up credit in the developing world. So there's a startup called Ayala Credit, which has used biometric, employer, and mobile phone data to allow people to access instant loans in emerging markets. And so their co-founder, Wale Akambi, states that the use of the facial recognition technology as part of their overall identity management solution has allowed them to accurately map out various skin tones for purposes of verifying people's identities and providing loans. In evaluating, I think, what is the right approach to public policy, it's important to focus on the behavior that you want to either incentivize or prevent, and taking into account some trade-offs. So, like in the case of cars, some people operate under the influence, but we don't ban cars. We criminalize the behavior, being inebriated while operating a car, that we kind of want to prevent. So successful policies tackling data, privacy, identity management, security take very similar approaches. They don't regulate necessarily the mechanism by which the data is collected, but they look at, okay, toward what end is this data being put? So they regulate the way in which resulting data is used, shared, safeguarded, et cetera. And despite a greater awareness by the public about potential issues of bias on data sets used to train FRT, I think a survey conducted earlier this month got some press where it was by the Center for Data Innovation, where they found, at least in the case of public safety, the vast majority of Americans really wanted to support the use by government of FRT in limited cases, especially with like airport security. So balancing the city's public safety objectives against residents' privacy and civil rights is not an easy exercise. And as an association, we do not have a position on the city's desire to propose a temporary ban on FRT by the city of Portland itself. That's a hard decision for you all to grapple with, but there are trade-offs. And so allowing for ongoing testing and maintenance of this evolving technology is something we'd support, and we heard that from the council today. So. But in the area of private use, as John mentioned, when using FRT for public safety and security, there's definitely a lot of businesses that believe an outright ban is something they will not support. But notice and consent as principles are something that are reasonable requirements. Beyond areas involving FRT for private security is the city contemplates restrictions in public places and private establishments open to the public. We'd respectfully recommend the city take an approach similar to what is done with other technologies that the city has tested. So one example is with air quality and traffic sensors deployed along Southeast Powell. You'd allow for the deployment of different technologies and limited pilots focused on specific uses. You test the technologies under different conditions and environments.
That's time.
Oh, okay. And then by inviting in, community partners, businesses, you can publish the results. And so count us in for any sort of effort going forward where we can work with the community, with the government to effectively look at different ways that issues can be addressed and the technology can be evolved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, both of you.
I add my thank you as well, and I wanted to start by really thanking John Isaac, Portland Business Alliance, and you'd be amazed how much time I spend talking to the Portland Business Alliance. But what I find is that it was a very open and productive conversation that we've had. And I'm really grateful that you really spent a lot of time with my staffer, Doug Bradley, and got a lot of your questions answered. For your association, what are you doing to be proactive to ensure that people of color and women aren't being harmed by the new technology that your industry is developing?
Mm-hmm.
How's that for a short, sweet, to the point question?
No, it's great. I mean, I think that with any type of technology, we've been working very closely with communities of color, with other organizations to look at different ways that technology can be utilized as a force for good to help solve problems that the community faces. This past fall, we collaborated with the City of Portland and the Port of Portland and Multnomah County and a lot of organizations locally that work with communities of color to identify community problems, and then can we develop solutions collectively to solve for those. It was actually recognized recently as one of the top community engagement awards out of 500 applications from around the world. So we'll be in Denver on behalf of the community accepting that award in April. And this is a new evolving technology that, again, to the point made earlier, we would love to get involved in much the same way. FRT was not a subject of that exercise in the fall, but given the controversy around it, we would love to look at ways that we can engage our members and work with the community and with government to figure out some ways that we can test, develop, improve.
So I want to be really clear. I want to ban this technology until it works as intended, right? That is my goal. I am absolutely open to working with the technology community about how do we create better technology so that we're not suffering the inequalities that this is automatically built in. My lived experience is we've never once been able to undo inequity once it is spread out across America. Not once, right? So I have no doubt that we would not be able to correct the inequities if we allowed it to continue to grow as is. I'm very open to sitting down with the technology and the business community because we are a tech town. We are a town that actually loves technological advancements, but we're also a town that's very aware of our historic history, especially as it relates to race and racism and how it's been built into our DNA. And so I am proud to be part of a city council who is very clear about the fact that we love technology, but sometimes technology is dangerous and it is in the wrong hands, could be used for harm. And so I'm open. I look forward to us continuing this conversation. And John, I really look forward to continuing to work with the Portland Business Alliance to make sure that we are keeping those business owners in the loop and they don't feel like we're off doing our own thing here at City Hall, right? I am committed to this. The last thing I want to say is that Alan, I think, put a good challenge on the table, which is what is the technology industry doing to engage communities of color so that they have access to the new technology that's coming down the pike in a way that is proactive and beneficial for those communities. So
Yep.
I hope that you will take us up on this opportunity, right, to really help our communities learn and also protect them from the misuse of their private information.
Very good.
Just
Go ahead, and
one
then
quick
Commissioner
comment.
Fritz has a
So,
comment.
yes, count us in, and I think also more broadly to not just use of the technology, but also a role in developing it. So the access to economic opportunity and helping to develop the technology from the beginning, that's something we're fully committed to.
You know, and I thank you for mentioning that, because I know women of color especially have a really hard time in the tech field, and they don't last, and I sure would like to find out why that is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fritz, then Commissioner Udaley, and then I'll have a comment and a question.
I appreciate these two folks being invited to testify. It might have been helpful to have their comments a little earlier in the session, but I'm very glad that we have had them now, because I think there are many sides to this story or to this issue. Remain concerned about the right of the accused to face their accuser, and if the accuser is a computer that says it's you when it wasn't, I think that might be something to consider as to how do we then get over the presumption of guilt if in fact there's been a mistake made, even if it's a 0.0001% mistake. Let's factor that in as to how we're considering. But I was ready to support a ban 6 months or so ago, at least, until we figure out how to improve the technology and also how to safeguard people, even if the technology is better.
Commissioner Udaley?
Well, thank you for being here today, and thank you for the presentation. I want to appreciate the work that Portland Business Alliance has put into this, and I am thankful for this feedback, and I think it's reasonable feedback. I especially appreciate 3 and 4. Sorry. Just so I don't get a phone call in the middle of this. Here's what I'm struggling with. I don't believe we can adequately regulate a deeply flawed technology. And I believe right now that the product, by design or default, will lead to discrimination. So that's where I'm really struggling. I think we have more conversations to have about the private ban. I don't know what that looks like, but I gotta say it's always a little risky to use a drunk driving analogy with your transportation commissioner. So I wanna run with that for a minute. In this analogy, the corollaries are the car is the facial recognition technology. The person driving is the tech company, and the inebriant or the intoxicant is the biased data. We've had 100 years or more to figure out how to regulate the car industry. We've built our whole country up around it. We are still struggling with safety issues, with climate change, with disparate impacts on communities of color. I won't be here in 100 years, but I really hope that whoever is not having this conversation about facial recognition technology, and God knows what else is coming down the pipeline. If this technology resulted in misidentification and a loss of civil rights, and let's be honest, possibly a loss of life, who's responsible? In the drunk driving accident, it's the driver. But are these companies going to be held responsible for the disparate impacts on women and communities of color? Are they going to be financially liable if their technology leads to someone losing rights, liberty, and possibly life? I mean, I don't want to beat up on you guys because I think what you're saying is reasonable, but you will probably regret using that analogy because, I mean, I could just keep going and going on this. So yes, let's keep having conversations, but right now, I'm really struggling. You know, I brought up the example of a bank, because a bank seems like a reasonable place that you might want facial recognition. Banks have a higher risk of kind of violent crime, robberies. But then we hear, the chilling effect, potential exclusion of people that need this essential service. Yeah, it's really thorny, so let's keep talking.
Sure.
I got you, Ed.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think the point with the analogy was just that there are a lot of different ways that companies and other organizations are currently using different types of technology to essentially collect data on people and identify them. And so that's constantly changing, potentially like every couple of years, right? 18 months, you've got new technologies coming out. And it's really tough to craft policy, to your point, that in some cases we've had the benefit of hundreds of years worth of litigation and other things to kind of work out the kinks. Here the technology is moving so fast.
Yeah.
That old paradigm doesn't work. So I think we all collectively are trying to figure out like what's the best way collaboratively that we can work together, both the people that are trying to develop the technology, the people who are working in the community, trying to represent the best interests, government, which has a variety of sort of safeguard related relationships to the public on public safety, on issues of privacy. So when all that comes together, much like the technology is being developed in more agile environments, how do we collectively create agile environments here among all these sectors to figure out how to learn from one another and make sure the outcomes are what we want? So that was mainly the intent with that analogy.
Yep,
John?
and I would say, our discussion involved businesses of all types from all different sectors. Again, most of them not technology companies. And, you had diversity of perspectives. We have members who may testify on their own in support of whatever you put before council. And we have some that may testify against it because that's their individual business perspective. What we try to do is do the hard work so that I could come before you and say, here's principles the broader business community agrees on. And they agreed that it's an unacceptable use of any technology. And this is one thing I appreciated about our members. If you heard my comments, you could apply those principles to any discussion about any number of technologies. They weren't specific to facial recognition. And it's not acceptable if a certain technology is not capable of avoiding bias. And so I think to be consistent with that in the view of our members, we would ask that, whatever you put before you has the characteristics of, I know you said, let's not talk moratorium versus ban, but has the characteristics of a moratorium so that the work that Skip is talking about, that the tech community is doing, when we get to that point, we have the opportunity to take advantage of this technology.
We would like to be respectful
Yep.
of the time from the commissioners and
We're
everyone.
actually doing pretty well for our usual work session. I have one comment and maybe a question. First of all, I want to acknowledge that this is a big issue. And the reason we are discussing it here at the Portland City Council is because the federal government has chosen to punt on this issue and not take action. We have experience with new technologies in this community. We saw it with short-term rentals and we saw it with TNCs. And the reality is that, and I want to make a bit of a differentiation here between big tech and what makes up the bulk of our technology community here, which is smaller, more innovative, more entrepreneurial technology. But the reality is when big tech came in, they bulldozed local communities in the absence of federal standards. Yep. And as a result of that, with each new technology that comes by, we are being more and more discriminating about how that technology is deployed, and we want to protect the interests of the public. We know that the technology industry understands that the ultimate battle isn't for market share, it's for information. Whoever controls information controls the world. And ultimately, this technology is about controlling our information. And I would argue it's very different than the TNCs or short-term rentals because you're talking about issues of life and death in the context of public safety, and you're talking about civil rights and civil liberties. And we heard some very, very compelling testimony from individuals who represent frontline communities who say, look, this time let's take into account the needs, the interests, and the histories of those frontline communities. And my belief is that we are not being anti-technology by raising these questions and asking, how do we make sure that as this technology spreads and it's deployed broadly, that we are protecting the interests of those in our community who have historically been steamrolled by some of these innovations. What I would like to see Portland do differently is say, we are pro-technology, we are pro-innovation, we are pro-creativity, and what makes us different and unique is we're not just chasing information gathering or market share or ROI. What we are actually trying to do is deploy technologies, new innovative technologies, in a way that people have failed to deploy them previously, which is with frontline communities being considered first as part of the conversation. In other words, our technologies will deploy with the protections in place for the people that we represent, and we'll move forward lockstep with the technology industry. A good example where we've worked on this together is the autonomous vehicle industry. We did not just say we're banning the autonomous vehicle industry. What we said is Portland's not ready yet to have autonomous vehicles going through our community. We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the rules, we don't fully understand the technology, but we encourage, we support, we want to help work to develop that technology and have Portland be a hub for that technology while working in partnership around the kinds of rules, regulations, infrastructure, and responsibility that we collectively share to responsibly deploy that technology so that it works for us rather than happening to us. And I see this as a great example for us to be able to do that. I'm not going to ask the question because I spoke longer than I wanted to, but I would just say, Skip, you were apparently in the room when I was having the conversation with Alan and the Urban League and others about how could we have this conversation about the proper way and the modern way and the new way to deploy technology, and how does Portland get on the front, the pointy edge of the spear in terms of delivering technologies in a way that people have not seen technology delivered in the past. So I hope you'll consider that. I think there's a great opportunity there. We are approaching this with a sense of urgency, but there is an important longer-term partnership that I think we can build here and do something really, really incredible.
Mayor, sometimes you
agreed.
are extremely eloquent in your
Sometimes.
statement. And I want you to know that I absolutely support what you just said 100%. But I think you were nicer than I want to be. And so what I want to do is actually put a challenge out to the tech community, right? You want this technology? You need to get the community together and government together, and we need to figure out how do we get it? And how do we make sure that the people who are developing the new technology that is supposed to benefit us all actually reflects the people who live in this community, right?
Yep.
And so I'm putting it on you. You represent the industry. Show us what you got, right? When you work in partnership with our community to build something that we can all be proud of. And I will say, and I think I can speak for my colleagues, we're here to help, but it's your industry. You've got to lead it. Thank you so much.
So this was a great conversation, and I appreciate your testimony, and I appreciate everybody who testified previously. We could go on for hours and hours and hours on this subject.
Hey, geek out on this.
But I'm glad we were having this conversation, and I want to thank the Smart Cities folks. I want to thank the Bureau folks. I want to thank everybody who worked so hard on this.
Now, Judith's going to tell us what the next steps are.
Judith?
Yes,
where
thank
are
you
we?
so much.
Excuse me, before I turn it over to you, I do want to thank Derek Bradley from my office, who has been just phenomenal, working with every office to try to make sure that we're all on the same page. Thank you so much. You know, I rarely thank folks because I think it's their job, but when they go above and beyond, I really want to appreciate that. So
Derek,
thank
why
you.
don't you wave so we can embarrass you? There you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and a well-deserved call-out. We've really enjoyed working with Derek on this project. Thank you all for being here. We're very excited that we're engaging at this level. Also excited that when we do a work session, that provides us the opportunity to share all this with a much broader community. So we'll be sending out a link to the work session, encouraging people that this is another opportunity for them to educate themselves. We're looking for every possible way to engage with community in meaningful and innovative ways. As Darren said, we're talking to the Urban League and others about how do we partner to really make sure we're hearing from those most impacted and those at the front line. I would be irresponsible if I didn't say we're working with very little resources, and I don't think Hector ever sleeps anymore. The Smart City team is remarkable, all of them, and it really is just it's an honor to work with people who take their public service to this extent and care about it like they do. So we will be continuing to do that work. We're going to have a couple of community outreach engagement sessions, and then it is our hope that from this meeting, we will be drafting a draft of a private use policy. We wanted this to happen, so this could inform that work. That will start to get run through the lawyers and the public and everybody else, and then we will come back to council as soon as possible. We're hoping early spring to be able to get these ordinances passed so that we can get to work on all these other larger questions of surveillance. This is just the beginning, tip of the iceberg conversation. We really appreciate your all leadership and making the space available. Thank you to everybody who testified, and I'm sure that together with these amazing minds, we can come up with some remarkable things.
Can I just double check something, Judith? We are planning to bring both of the ordinances together.
That's my understanding. Yep.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, to be continued. Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.